What if I told you that the person everyone pities at family gatherings, the one they whisper about, with concerned looks, the one they're desperately trying to set up on blind dates, is actually the most powerful person in the room? You know who I'm talking about. The single person. The one who chose to walk alone while everyone else paired up. Society calls them lonely. Alan Watts called them liberated. And by the end of this video, you will understand why your single friends might be accessing a level of consciousness that married people forgot even existed. Or maybe you're that single person, and you're about to discover why you've been right all along. Picture this. You're at a dinner party. On your left sits Jennifer, showing off her engagement ring, planning her wedding, talking about compromise and communication. On your right sits Marcus, been single for 3 years, reading philosophy, traveling solo, seems perfectly content. Who would you say has figured out life? Hold that answer, because what I'm about to reveal will shatter everything you believe about relationships and happiness. Jennifer is negotiating which suburbs to live in, what color to paint the nursery, whose family to spend Christmas with. Marcus is studying ancient wisdom, exploring his consciousness, becoming someone he actually wants to be. Jennifer is building a life someone else approved of. Marcus is building a life that's actually his. So why does everyone think Jennifer made the right choice and Marcus is running from commitment? Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. You pity Marcus because he threatens the biggest lie you've ever been sold. Alan Watts spent decades teaching people about consciousness and freedom. And what he discovered was this: society doesn't fear single people. We fear single people who are happy because they prove that everything we've been taught about needing another person is a carefully constructed illusion. But here's what Watts understood that nobody talks about. The single person isn't actually alone. They're experiencing a form of connection that people in relationships have completely forgotten exists. While everyone else is completing each other, the single person is completing themselves. And that completion, that wholeness, that's what will transform how you see everything. But to understand why staying single is actually a hidden superpower, we need to explore the one thing that makes people more uncomfortable than anything else. Watts said, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance." But what happens when you decide to dance alone? When you refuse to need someone else to make you feel complete? If you've ever felt pressure to be in a relationship just because everyone else is, this video will set you free. Watch until the end, because what I'm about to show you will change how you see your entire life. That's the single person who discovered their power. They're a walking contradiction that breaks everyone's brain, has deeper connections than coupled people, but doesn't need a relationship status to prove it. Experiences more authentic intimacy, but won't settle for the performance of partnership. Feels more complete alone than most people do with someone else. And this terrifies everyone, because if happiness doesn't require another person, if fulfillment doesn't demand coupling up, if completeness doesn't need someone else to validate it, then what does that say about the compromises you've been making your entire life? Alan Watts discovered something that explains why single people make everyone so uncomfortable. And it has nothing to do with loneliness. Remember that awkward feeling people get when you tell them you're happily single? Watts had an explanation for it. And once you understand what it is, you'll never feel pressure to couple up again. Quick question. When was the last time you made a decision completely for yourself? Not because your partner wanted it. Not because it would look good to your family. Not because society expects it at your age. Just because you wanted it. If you're in a relationship and you can't remember, that's the problem. Watts discovered that our obsession with partnership isn't about love. It's about avoiding the one thing that terrifies us most, ourselves. He understood that most people enter relationships not from wholeness, but from lack. Not from abundance, but from fear. Not from love, but from the terror of being alone with their own thoughts. But here's what Watts knew that changes everything. When you're running from yourself into someone else's arms, you're not finding love. You're finding distraction. Think about the last time you were alone for an entire weekend. Did you enjoy it? Or did you feel anxious, empty, like something was missing? The single person who's discovered their power doesn't feel that emptiness. And that's what makes them dangerous. They're not using another person to avoid themselves. They're not performing partnership to prove their worth. They're not even pretending to need someone. And somehow, this is the part that breaks everyone's brain, they're happier than most married people you know. Watts wrote, "You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself." What irritates people about the happy single person? That they're not following the life script you were handed. That they're not sacrificing their authenticity for social approval. That they're not treating their life like a problem that needs solving through partnership. But what if they're not the problem? What if the problem is the belief system that convinced you that you're incomplete without someone else? Let me show you something Watts discovered about human consciousness that explains why single people have access to a type of freedom that most people never experience. Here's what relationship coaches don't want you to know. Your true self can only emerge when you're not performing for someone else. Everything you've been taught about relationships is backwards. Watts said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The single person has stopped trying to define themselves through another person's eyes. And that's when real self-discovery begins. Think about who you are in a relationship, not who you want to be. Who you actually are. You adjust your opinions to avoid conflict. You modify your dreams to align with shared goals. You compromise on the small things so often that you forget what you actually wanted in the first place. You perform a version of yourself that keeps the peace. Now think about who you are when you're completely alone. No one to impress, no one to accommodate, no one watching. That person, that's who you actually are. And most people in relationships haven't met that person in years. Watts understood something profound. The single person isn't avoiding intimacy. They're experiencing the deepest intimacy possible. Intimacy with themselves. While coupled people are negotiating whose turn it is to take out the trash, the single person is negotiating with their own soul about who they want to become. While relationships are built on compromise, self-discovery is built on uncompromising honesty. And that honesty reveals something that society desperately wants to hide. You don't need another person to be whole. You never did. The belief that you're incomplete without a partner, that's not wisdom passed down through generations. That's social programming designed to keep you dependent, predictable, and easy to market to. Think about it. The wedding industry is worth billions. The couples therapy industry is massive. Every movie, every song, every advertisement tells you the same story. You need to find your other half. But Watts asked a different question. What if you're not a half waiting for completion? What if you're already whole? The single person who's discovered this truth has accessed something that changes everything. Not loneliness, not isolation, but liberation. They've realized that the most important relationship they'll ever have isn't with a romantic partner. It's with themselves. And once you prioritize that relationship, everything else becomes optional rather than necessary. Watts observed that we're taught to find ourselves in others. But the truth is reversed. You can only truly connect with others after you've connected with yourself. The single person is doing the work that most people avoid their entire lives. They're becoming someone worth being, not someone worth dating, not someone who checks all the boxes, someone who actually knows who they are. And that knowing, that self-awareness, that's the first hidden power. But it's just the beginning. Because what Watts discovered next explains why single people often achieve more, create more, and contribute more than their coupled counterparts. Here's the second hidden power that nobody talks about. Your energy isn't divided. Think about how much mental and emotional energy a relationship requires. Planning dates, managing expectations, having the same conversation about feelings for the 100th time, remembering anniversaries, navigating family dynamics, compromising on everything from dinner choices to life decisions. That's not necessarily bad, but it's energy. Energy that could be directed elsewhere. Watts understood that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And when you're in a relationship, your attention is constantly split. The single person has something that's becoming extinct in our world: undivided attention. They can direct their full consciousness toward their purpose, their growth, their contribution. They're not spending hours decoding text messages or wondering if their partner is upset. They're not compromising their vision to accommodate someone else's comfort level. This is why so many of history's greatest achievements came from single people, or people who prioritize their work over relationships. Newton was single, Beethoven was single, Tesla was single. They weren't running from intimacy. They were running towards something bigger. Watts himself understood this. He knew that great work requires great focus, and great focus requires freedom from constant relational maintenance. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't about being selfish, it's about being honest about what you're here to do. Some people are meant to build partnerships. Some people are meant to build legacies. Neither is better. But pretending you're one when you're actually the other, that's where suffering comes from. The single person who's embraced their path has clarity that it's impossible to achieve when you're constantly negotiating with someone else's needs. They know what matters to them, because there's no one else's opinion drowning out their inner voice. They know what they want because they don't have to justify it to anyone. They know who they are because they're not performing a role in someone else's story. This undivided energy creates something powerful. Focus, the ability to pursue what matters without apology, the freedom to fail without taking someone else down with you, the space to succeed without guilt that your achievement might threaten your partner's ego. Watts believed that the meaning of life is just to be alive. The single person understands this in a way that people in relationships often don't. They're not living for two. They're not considering someone else's happiness with every decision. They're fully alive in their own experience. And that aliveness, that full presence in their own life, that's where real power comes from. The third hidden power is even more profound. You're learning what real love actually is. Watts said something that most people never understand. You didn't come into this world. You came out of it, like a wave from the ocean. And here's what that means for single people. When you stop seeking love outside yourself, you discover that love isn't something you find. It's something you are. Most relationships are built on need disguised as love. I need you to make me feel secure. I need you to validate my choices. I need you to fill the emptiness I feel when I'm alone. That's not love. That's dependency with better marketing. Real love, the kind Watts talked about, doesn't come from need. It comes from overflow. When you're so complete in yourself, that connection with others becomes an expression of your fullness, rather than an attempt to fill your emptiness. The single person has the opportunity to discover this. Every day alone is a chance to build that internal completeness. Every moment of solitude is practice in generating your own sense of wholeness. This is why single people who've done the inner work have better relationships when they choose to have them. Not because they need the relationship, because they want it. There's a massive difference. Need makes you clingy, jealous, controlling. Want makes you generous, trusting, free. Need turns love into a transaction. Want turns love into a gift. And you can only access want after you've eliminated need. The single person is eliminating need. They're learning that their happiness doesn't depend on whether someone texts back. Their worth doesn't fluctuate based on someone else's opinion. Their life doesn't require another person's participation to have meaning. This is terrifying to people in codependent relationships. Because if love doesn't require need, then what have they been calling love all these years? Watts understood that we confuse attachment with love constantly. Attachment says, I need you here because I'm incomplete without you. Love says, I celebrate your existence and my own. The single person is learning the difference, and once you learn that difference, you can never unknow it. The fourth hidden power will surprise you. You're developing authentic confidence. Not the fake confidence that comes from having someone desire you. Not the borrowed confidence that comes from being chosen. Real confidence that comes from proving to yourself that you can handle life alone. Watts observed that a person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusion. Coupled people often live in the illusion that their partner's presence is what makes them capable. The single person discovers the reality. They were always capable. Think about every challenge you faced while single, every decision you made alone, every problem you solved without someone else's input, every fear you confronted by yourself. Each of those moments built something inside you that can never be taken away. Self-reliance, not the toxic kind that refuses help, the healthy kind that knows you'll be okay either way. This confidence changes how you move through the world. You're not looking for someone to complete you because you know you're already complete. You're not seeking validation because you've learned to validate yourself. You're not afraid of being alone because you've discovered that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. Watts said, "Man suffers only because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun." The single person has learned to take themselves less seriously. They've stopped treating their relationship status like a measurement of their worth. They've realized that whether they are single or coupled says nothing about their value as a human being. This frees them from the desperate energy that repels the very connection they seek. People can smell desperation. They can sense when someone needs them to fill a void, and that need pushes people away. But when you don't need anyone, when you're genuinely complete on your own, that's when you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to attract someone, because you've become someone worth knowing. The single person who's built real confidence doesn't chase, doesn't perform, doesn't pretend. They simply exist as their authentic self. And that authenticity is rare enough to be irresistible. Here's the fifth hidden power that changes everything. You're mastering the art of solitude. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude that most people never discover. Loneliness is feeling empty when you're alone. Solitude is feeling full when you're alone. Watts understood this distinction deeply. He knew that people avoid solitude because they're afraid of what they'll find there. But the single person who embraces solitude discovers something incredible. Peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. Joy that isn't contingent on someone else's presence. Contentment that comes from within rather than without. This is revolutionary in a world that's terrified of silence. People fill every moment with noise, distraction, connection. Not because they want to, because they're running from the quiet. But the quiet is where wisdom lives. The quiet is where you hear your own voice. The quiet is where you discover who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. Watts taught that muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. Your mind works the same way. All the confusion, all the anxiety, all the questions about what you should do with your life, they don't get solved by adding more voices, more opinions, more input. They get solved in solitude. When you stop asking everyone else what you should do and start listening to what you already know. The single person has access to this transformative solitude. They can spend an entire weekend alone and emerge clearer rather than lonelier. They can sit in silence and find answers rather than emptiness. They can be with themselves and discover that themselves is actually pretty good company. This mastery of solitude creates something powerful. Independence of mind. The ability to think your own thoughts without needing someone else to validate them. The capacity to trust your own judgment without requiring consensus. The strength to stand alone when everyone else is following the crowd. Watts believed that problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way. Most people ask, how can I avoid being alone? The single person asks, how can I be fully alive in my aloneness? That question changes everything, because when you're no longer avoiding solitude, you're no longer dependent on others to save you from yourself. And that independence is freedom itself. The sixth hidden power is something Watts considered essential to consciousness. You're experiencing life directly, rather than through the filter of relationship dynamics. Every experience you have while single is yours completely. That sunset doesn't need to be shared to be beautiful. That insight doesn't need someone else's agreement to be true. That moment of joy doesn't require validation to be real. Coupled people experience life through a lens of how will this affect us? What will my partner think? How does this fit into our shared narrative? The single person experiences life directly. This creates a purity of experience that's increasingly rare. When you travel alone, You're fully present to the place rather than managing someone else's experience of it. When you make a discovery, you're fully immersed in the revelation rather than explaining it to someone else. When you feel something deeply, you're fully in the feeling rather than translating it into words that someone else can understand. Watts said, "This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize it is play." The single person can play without needing a playmate. They can be fully engaged without needing someone else to be engaged with them. This direct experience of life creates depth that reflected experience can't match. You're not living for the story you'll tell later. You're living for the living itself. You're not creating memories to share. You're creating experiences to transform you. This is why single people often have richer inner lives than their coupled friends. Not because their external lives are more interesting, because their internal relationship to their external life is more immediate. There's no buffer between them and reality. No one else's interpretation competing with their own perception. Just them and life meeting directly in each moment. The seventh hidden power might be the most controversial. You're free to evolve without negotiation. Watts understood that the only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. But here's what happens in most relationships. You want to change, but your partner fell in love with who you were. You want to evolve, but evolution threatens the stability your partner needs. You want to become someone new, but becoming someone new means your partner has to adapt to someone they didn't sign up for. This creates a tension that kills growth. You either stop evolving to preserve the relationship, or you evolve and risk the relationship ending. The single person faces no such tension. You can completely reinvent yourself tomorrow, and the only person who needs to adjust is you. You can change your entire life direction, and nobody gets to vote on whether that's okay. You can become someone totally different from who you were last year, and there's no betrayal in that transformation. This freedom to evolve creates accelerated growth. Without someone else's comfort level limiting your expansion, you can grow as fast as your consciousness allows. Without someone else's fear constraining your courage, you can take risks that transform everything. Without someone else's expectations defining your identity, you can discover who you actually are beneath who you thought you had to be. Watts taught that the menu is not the meal. Most people in relationships are living the menu, the description of life that everyone agreed was acceptable. The single person is tasting the actual meal, the direct experience of becoming without limitation. This is why single people often seem younger than their married peers. Not because they're immature, because they're still growing. They haven't frozen themselves into a fixed identity to maintain relational stability. They're fluid, evolving, becoming. And that becoming, that's what being alive actually means. The eighth and final hidden power is the one Watts considered most important. You're learning that you're already complete. This is the great illusion that keeps people trapped. The belief that you're a half waiting for your other half. That you're incomplete until someone completes you. That you're a puzzle with a missing piece that only a romantic partner can provide. Watts knew this was the biggest lie consciousness could tell itself. You're not half of anything. You're whole, you always were. The universe doesn't make incomplete things. It makes whole things that have forgotten their wholeness. The single person has the opportunity to remember. Every day you survive without needing someone else proves you're complete. Every moment you feel joy without sharing it proves happiness is internal. Every challenge you overcome alone proves you're enough. This remembering is enlightenment itself. Not the mystical kind that requires years of meditation. The practical kind that changes how you relate to everything. When you know you're complete, relationships become optional rather than necessary. When you know you're whole, other people become additions to your life rather than solutions to your problems. When you know you're enough, you stop searching and start living. Watts said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. You can't find yourself in someone else because you're not lost. You're right here. You've always been right here." The single person is discovering this truth in a way that people in relationships often can't. Because every day alone is evidence that you don't need what you thought you needed. Every moment of contentment without a partner is proof that completion comes from within. This is the hidden power that unlocks all the others. Because once you know you're complete, everything changes. You're not dating from desperation, but from curiosity. You're not seeking relationship, but experiencing connection. You're not trying to be chosen, but choosing how you want to experience life. And that choice, that sovereignty over your own existence, that's what Watts called freedom. The single person who's discovered these 8 hidden powers isn't alone. They're free. They're not lonely. They're liberated. They're not missing something. They're accessing something that most people never find. Now here's what you need to understand. These powers don't come automatically from being single. They come from doing the work that being single makes possible. You can be single and miserable, waiting for someone to rescue you. Or you can be single and powerful, building a life so rich that relationship becomes enhancement rather than requirement. The choice is yours, and that choice will define the entire trajectory of your consciousness. Watts spent his life teaching that the meaning of life is just to be alive. The single person has the clearest path to that aliveness, because nothing is mediating their direct experience of existence, but you have to choose it consciously. You have to decide that your single time isn't a waiting period, but a building period. You have to commit to becoming so complete in yourself that another person becomes optional rather than essential. Because here's the truth that will set you free. The right relationship doesn't complete you. It celebrates the completion you've already achieved. The right person doesn't fill your emptiness. They dance with your fullness. And you can only attract that kind of connection after you've built that kind of wholeness. Your single time is your opportunity, not your punishment, not your failure. Your opportunity to build something that most people never access. Yourself, fully realized, completely whole, absolutely free. Drop in the comments right now, "I choose wholeness over waiting," and watch how that declaration shifts something inside you. Your words have power, and claiming your completeness activates it. Smash that subscribe button because you've just proven you're ready for truth that most people run from. And this channel delivers exactly that truth in every single video. Hit the like button to tell the algorithm that this message matters, that people need to hear they're already complete, that the world needs fewer desperate people and more liberated ones. Your like isn't just for me, it's a vote for everyone who needs to discover these 8 powers. And here's what's coming next. There's another truth society has been hiding, another way you've been programmed to believe you're insufficient. And when I reveal it in the next video, your entire understanding of human potential will shatter and rebuild itself into something unrecognizable. The people who watch that video will never see the world the same way again, and you'll want to be among them when it drops. Stay single, stay powerful, stay free, or don't stay single. But carry this wholeness into whatever you choose, because that's what real freedom looks like.